When someone falls out of love with you, it rarely begins with a dramatic confession or a slammed door. More often, it begins in silence. There's no announcement, no warning, just a subtle shift, like a familiar room that suddenly feels colder. The same voice still speaks. The same face still smiles. But something underneath is missing. The tenderness is gone. The connection that once felt natural now requires effort. And it's not because either of you changed overnight. It's because love, when it fades, rarely does so loudly. Most people don't say, "I don't love you anymore." They stop showing it, not out of cruelty, but because their emotional compass has quietly turned elsewhere. Attention slips, priorities change, and the person who once made you feel chosen now makes you feel like an obligation. That's the hard part. Not rejection, but indifference. Have you ever found yourself lying next to someone, physically close, yet emotionally miles apart? There's no argument, no dramatic exit, just silence. An emotional vacancy that grows a little more each day until one day, you realize you're grieving a love that hasn't technically ended, but no longer lives. In this video, we'll explore the first two signs that someone has started to lose love for you. Not the obvious ones, but the quiet shifts, the subtle behavioral changes that Stoic wisdom teaches us to observe without denial. Because understanding what these signs really mean can save you from months or years of confusion, self-doubt, and unnecessary pain. As Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." So if you've ever felt invisible in a relationship that once made you feel seen, this message is for you. Let's uncover the truth behind love's quiet exit. The lesson of the falling leaves. There's a quiet truth many overlook. When love starts to fade, it doesn't shout and it doesn't storm. It withdraws gently, leaving behind clues only visible to those who are willing to look. Let me take you into a quiet valley, where one man discovered this truth not through betrayal, but through silence. In a peaceful village nestled between the hills, a farmer named Calin lived a life of routine and devotion. His days were filled with work, but his heart belonged to Mira, his wife, his anchor, his peace. Their life was simple but filled with quiet moments of affection, shared smiles, evening walks, whispered goodnights. Callan believed that with time, their bond had deepened. But one autumn, something shifted. There was no argument, no obvious betrayal, just absence. Mira no longer met him at the door. Her words became shorter, her gaze more distant. The meals were still there, the home still warm, but the connection that once wrapped around them was slipping through unnoticed. Callan tried to restore the warmth. He brought her the pastries she liked, cared for her garden, recited old poems, but her responses were no longer heartfelt. They were kind, but empty. It was as if she had become a stranger watching an old memory replay itself. One morning, burdened with confusion, Callan left his home and ventured toward the forest. Deep within it lived an old man called the Watcher, not a sage, not a healer, but someone who had once loved and lost, and learned to live with the silence that followed. Callan found him sitting alone, observing the fall of leaves. The two men sat in silence, watching the golden spirals drift down from the trees. After a long pause, Callan finally said, "She's still with me, but I feel like I'm alone. How do I know if her love is truly gone?" The Watcher reached for a dry leaf and held it in his hand. Love doesn't vanish with thunder. It slips away quietly, like the leaf that changes color at the edge, then fades at the center, until one day it lets go. There are always signs, but they whisper. They don't scream. He pointed to a towering tree nearby. This tree lets go of what it no longer needs each year, not from resentment, but from wisdom. If you want to know if her love is left, stop demanding answers. Listen, watch. Her silence will say more than words ever could. The watcher gently placed the leaf in Kalen's hand. When the time comes, he said, you won't have to ask. You'll already know. First sign, they no longer share their inner world. In a quiet meadow, where trees release their autumn leaves without resistance, Kalen came to understand something he had long resisted. Love, like nature, moves in seasons. When someone begins to drift away, the world doesn't make noise. It whispers. You don't hear alarms. You feel absences, missing warmth on a cold morning, a silence where laughter once lived. What's left is not the urge to hold tighter, but the quiet strength to witness the unraveling. And when love begins its departure, it always leaves two traces behind. The first, they no longer let you into their inner world. In the days after Kalen returned to the village, everything seemed familiar. Mira was still there. She asked about his work, cooked the same meals. But something vital had disappeared. And now, with new awareness, Kalen could feel it clearly. The air between them had changed. The casual ease of their conversations had given way to surface-level dialogue. The flow of thoughts, once natural and deep, was now cautious and shallow. She wasn't hiding anything, but she wasn't opening up either. The person who once welcomed him into her mind and heart had quietly withdrawn. He remembered the nights they sat by the fire, talking about dreams and doubts, about nothing and everything. Now she responded with short answers, polite smiles, and silence that said more than words could. One evening, hoping to reconnect, Kalen asked what had made her smile that day. She paused, seemed surprised by the question, and said nothing came to mind. The air turned heavy. It was like approaching a familiar doorway and finding it closed. No anger, no explanation, just a quiet refusal. The watcher had warned him of this. He called it the closing of the gate. Every soul, he had said, holds a private garden, full of memories, emotions, desires. Love is the invitation to enter that space. But when love fades, the gate doesn't slam shut. It simply stops opening. Not out of cruelty, but because there's no longer a need to share. They stop telling you the little things. They leave out the details they once couldn't wait to say. They no longer ask what you think, not out of spite, but because your thoughts no longer guide theirs. Kalen could see it now. She smiled. She poured his tea. But her heart had gone somewhere he could no longer follow. Her joys, her sorrows, her thoughts, once shared freely, were now her own again. And that told him everything. Epictetus once reminded us, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we might listen more than we speak. But what do you do when there's nothing left to hear? When the voice that once reached for yours grows still? The Stoics teach that pain doesn't come from events, but from our resistance to them. It wasn't her silence that hurt Kalen. It was his hope that she'd speak again. We cannot possess another soul. We are only ever visitors. And when the welcome fades, the wisest thing to do is not to force entry, but to step back with dignity. So Kalen stopped asking, not out of resentment, but out of respect. He no longer tried to pull back what had already gone. He simply watched. And in that quiet watching, he saw the truth, not in her words, but in her silence. This is the first sign. When love begins to leave, it grows quiet. They no longer share their dreams, their worries, their heart. You remain in their presence, but no longer in their mind. And once you've been left behind in someone's inner world, their outer world will soon follow. The first leaf has already fallen, and the garden gate has quietly closed. Second sign, they start comparing you silently. It was early evening when Callan noticed the change again. They walked through the village market just as they had many times before. In the past, their steps had moved in sync. They would pause at the same stalls, share smiles over oddly shaped vegetables, and choose herbs together with care. But today, something was different. Mira's attention was no longer on the moment. Her eyes drifted, not toward the goods or familiar smells, but toward the people around them. Callan watched as her gaze rested on a young couple laughing by the bakery. She didn't smile or frown. There was no longing in her eyes, just quiet distance, as if she was remembering something once cherished, now unreachable. Later, she murmured a compliment about a woman's dress at the village well. The remark was casual, almost dismissive, but in her voice, Callan sensed something deeper, an unconscious measurement. He had not been criticized, but he felt the sting all the same. That's how it often begins. When love begins to wane, the comparisons emerge, not loudly, not with malice, but softly, like a change in wind. They don't tell you outright. They don't need to. You begin to feel it instead. They start to notice things in others that they once admired in you. Qualities they used to celebrate now seem less than enough. Suddenly, your quirks become habits. Your once shared laughter feels forced. What once brought comfort now invites comparison. The watcher had spoken of this as well. He told Callan of a sculptor who carved a likeness of his beloved. At first, he shaped it with care, using memory as his guide. But over time, he added features that didn't belong to her: softer eyes, a smoother smile, a taller stance. When asked, he insisted it was still her. But the truth was, it had become someone else entirely. This is the danger of quiet comparison. It replaces what is real with an imagined ideal, and it always begins unnoticed. You'll see it in their eyes, how they light up when someone else speaks, and how they dim when you enter the room. You'll hear it in the change of tone, the shrinking interest in your stories. They may not realize it, but their heart has started looking elsewhere. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Be content to appear as you truly are." But when someone stops being content with who you are, they begin to drift, not with complaints, but with subtle glances, with fading smiles, with a quiet impatience you can't quite name. Callan began to see it in every shared space. Mira no longer reached for his hand. Her expressions, once lit by his presence, now came alive for others. And though she didn't say it, Callan knew. She was longing for something he could not offer. There is a unique sorrow in being evaluated in silence. It is the pain of being seen without being valued, of standing beside someone who is quietly wishing they were somewhere else. The Stoics teach us not to grasp for what lies outside our control. We cannot force someone to stop comparing us to others, but we can choose not to compare ourselves in return. Love, when built on competition and unmet longing, is no longer love. It is performance. And we are not here to audition for anyone's affection. When someone begins to compare, they stop seeing you clearly. They lose sight of who you are in the search for who you are not. And that, more than anything, signals a shift of the heart. Callan didn't argue. He didn't plead for her attention. He simply paid attention. And what he saw was someone still beside him in form, but drifting in spirit. Love fades not only when admiration ends, but when it is redirected. And the deepest hurt is not in being replaced, but in becoming invisible while still standing in plain sight. That is how the second leaf falls, not through words, not through farewell, but through a gaze that no longer truly sees you. What do you do when you recognize the signs? After weeks of silence and quiet realizations, Colin returned once more to the forest. The autumn air had grown colder since his last visit. The trees stood tall, still letting go of what they no longer needed. The watcher, as before, sat on the worn bench, unmoved by time, eyes resting on the endless drift of falling leaves. Callan sat beside him, the silence heavier than the wind. He looked not at the trees, but at the earth beneath them. His voice was soft, almost apologetic. "I've seen it. The signs are clear now. She doesn't share herself with me anymore. And worse, I feel her measuring me against people I'll never be. So, what does a man do with that truth?" The watcher didn't speak right away. Instead, he reached toward the ground and picked up a handful of crisp, brittle leaves. Slowly, he let them fall from his hand, each one twisting in the air, weightless and free. "You don't ask the wind to stay still," he said, "and you can't ask a leaf to cling to a tree when its season has passed." Callan exhaled. "Should I fight for her? Ask her to come back?" The watcher's gaze didn't shift. "You can plead. You can pour out everything inside you. But if her soul has already begun walking away, your words won't bring her back. You won't be speaking to her. You'll be speaking to the memory of what she used to be. That's the cruel truth about love," he continued. "Not that it ends, but that it fades while we're still holding on. We keep reaching for a connection that's no longer there, mistaking quiet absence for something temporary, when really, it's final." The Stoics had long warned against this, against clinging to what we cannot command. They taught that strength doesn't come from force, but from clarity. Epictetus said that real freedom is found not in getting what we want, but in letting go of what we can't control. "You can't control another person's heart," the watcher said. "You can't drag love back into a room it's already left. But you can control something far more important: your own dignity." Callan looked up, pain still etched across his face. And how does a man keep his dignity when the person he loves no longer sees him? By not chasing what has stopped choosing you. By not twisting your worth to win back attention that's already drifted. By choosing silence over desperation. Stillness over shame. You let them walk. Not because you don't care, but because you care enough not to beg. "And if they come back?" Callan asked. "Then let it be because they found their way back freely, not because you dragged them into guilt." The forest rustled quietly around them, leaves falling like soft confessions. "But if they don't," the watcher added, "you will still be standing. You will not be broken, only changed. Because letting go is not weakness. It's reverence for truth. It's love, refined into respect." Callan nodded slowly. "So, what should I do tomorrow?" The watcher smiled gently. "You rise. You step back into your life. You tend your land. You greet the morning with intention. You water what's yours, not because they left, but because you're still here. And that matters more than their absence ever could." "Let them go," he said one last time. "But more importantly, don't lose yourself trying to hold on to someone who already has. Love them, wish them peace, but choose your own soul over the shadow of theirs." And as the final leaf fell between them, Callan understood. When one season ends, a stronger self begins. This is what real Stoic strength is. Not numbness, not emotional retreat, but the quiet, unwavering courage to stand firm while the world you once relied on begins to shift. It's not about building walls. It's about rooting yourself so deeply in who you are that when others drift away, you don't lose your foundation. Callan didn't return to his home with rage in his heart. He didn't demand explanations or lash out in frustration. He didn't search for blame or chase the comfort of old words. Instead, he began to live with quiet intention. The pain was still there, but he no longer treated it like an enemy. He moved through it, one breath, one task, one moment at a time. He still woke before dawn. He still tended to the soil, the fences, the animals. But now there was a different stillness in him, a kind of strength that doesn't come from knowing how things will turn out, but from no longer needing to know. It wasn't surrender. It was release. A release of expectation, of grasping, of waiting for love that no longer returned to him. He no longer looked for warmth in her eyes or hints of affection in her voice. He stopped trying to resurrect what had already faded. And with that, something in him transformed. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but with the same subtle rhythm as the seasons. One chilly morning, Callan stood at the edge of his field. The wind carried the scent of turning leaves, and the land stretched before him, bare in parts, but still full of life. The crops had thinned, the trees stood stripped of their leaves, and yet nothing about the earth felt defeated. Everything was exactly as it needed to be. In the reflection of the window, Callan saw himself, not as a man who had been abandoned, but as one who had chosen to remain whole. A man who had not begged to be loved again, but who had loved himself enough to stop begging. The person he saw wasn't incomplete. He was honest, clear, and free. Love does not always vanish. Sometimes, it simply becomes something else. A season that nourished us and then passed. A chapter we carry with us in memory, not in our arms. It doesn't mean the love was wasted. It means it served its purpose, and its purpose was growth. The Stoics taught that nothing belongs to us. Not our possessions, not our relationships, not even the emotions we cling to. What we do own is our response, our power to choose reason over resentment, to meet the loss not with desperation, but with grace. Callan discovered that letting go wasn't a defeat. It was a form of mastery, a trust not in what others give, but in what we cultivate within ourselves. He trusted the soil beneath his feet, the rhythm of his breath, the truth that what leaves does not diminish us, unless we chase it to the point of forgetting who we are. And in that stillness, he found more than closure. He found presence. He found clarity. He found peace. Not because someone stayed, but because he stopped waiting for them to return. The season had ended, but Callan had just begun. A moment to look inward, a chance to reach out. He didn't walk away with regret, nor was his path marked by defeat. He walked with clarity, with the quiet strength that comes from finally seeing things as they are, not as he wished them to be. Now, I turn the question to you. Have you ever felt someone slowly slip away, not through harsh words or dramatic exits, but through the stillness of what is no longer shared? Have you noticed when their gaze wandered, not out of malice, but because their heart had already begun to move elsewhere? Have you stood in that uncertain space where love used to live, wondering if silence meant the end or just a pause? If you have, you are in the company of many. Almost all of us, at some point, have stood on that invisible edge, uncertain whether we should reach out one more time or take a step back. We wrestle with the same questions. Does letting go mean giving up? Or does it mean we finally understand that holding on isn't always an act of love? I offer you this space, not just to listen, but to participate. Take a breath, sit with your own story, and write it down. Have you let someone go with grace? Or are you still in the struggle, trying to understand what the silence means? Your story matters, and not just for your own healing. When we share our experiences, we do more than process them. We offer light to someone else still walking through the dark. In your honesty, others may find language for what they've felt but couldn't express. In your courage, they might see the outline of their own. Wisdom doesn't grow in silence alone. It grows in the spaces where truth is spoken, pain is honored, and growth is witnessed. So I invite you, genuinely, to reflect and share. Because love, at its core, is not about possession. It is something we experience, something we give without guarantees. And sometimes, the greatest act of love is knowing when to stop holding on and start letting go. Not with bitterness, but with understanding. Tell us what you've learned, what you've endured, or what you're still navigating. In doing so, you remind all of us that though love may shift or leave, we never have to face it alone.